Hello and welcome to the Bigger, Braver Life Show. I'm your host, Angela Marie Williams. As an entrepreneur and success coach, my mission is to empower you to realize your dreams and potential through transformational experiences. The purpose of this show is to inspire your positive change by learning from a community of those paving the way to a bigger, braver life. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Bigger, Braver Life Show. My name is Angela Williams. I'm a success coach and your host. We have a wonderful guest with us today. Today, I welcome Sophia Buesing, and I'm so excited to have her share her story with everyone. I was a guest on her podcast recently called The Shit Show of My 20s, where I talked about how we grow and learn, how we can do things ugly. They don't have to be perfect, and all of the great things about creating a bigger, braver life. And that is episode 154. If y'all want to check it out, check out her podcast. She has amazing guests there. So welcome, Sophia. Please tell us a little bit about you and what you do in this world.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to see what comes up. I always say that because whenever you talk with someone, you never know what's going to come up. Like you have an idea in your head, but always that better, I feel like, than what you're expecting. So that's one of the things I've felt like I really got from my podcast. I was like, oh, I wasn't expecting that or that or that. Oh, that's awesome. So I started my podcast back in 2020. And I was going through my own series of shit show moments back to back to back, all within the spirit of 6 months. So it was a lot. It was like a lot of, oh my gosh, it was like the rug was kind of just swept. I just felt like I was totally thrown off by everything that was going on.
Wow.
And what happened was I started in the corporate world at 19. Mm-hmm. I went through this whole process of first job. I got declined a lot of times. They're like, this girl's 19. She has no degree. I don't know if we're going to take her. So I went through this whole process of getting this job. And then I had all of my identity attached to it. And then the pandemic happens. And then I get an email that I've been furloughed. Oh. So I was furloughed for 3 months. And it was really hard because I had to separate. I didn't realize how much my identity was attached to receiving that paycheck, to having that job title. But it was literally so intermeshed that I couldn't figure out what was me and what was the identity, what was the job title, what was attached to that. So that was really hard for me. And I realized, and then before that, a couple months before that, I decided to sign a lease because I signed my lease based on what I thought was going to happen in the next couple months. And I just happened to sign a lease at the worst possible time because then we all go remote. And then I didn't even have a need for that apartment. And I was able to get out of that lease contract and I was able to get out of that one. But yeah, so that happened too. And that was hard. And then I decided, you know what? Oh, and then before that, a car accident happened. So it was 3 big moments. It was the car accident, and there was the lease, and then it was the furlough. So it was all in the spirit of 6 months. So it was pretty hard. So the car accident definitely shook me up too, because it realized how much I go through the motions every day. And then all of a sudden it's are you present every day? Is this what you want to be doing? Are you really there? Or are you just kind of going through the motions? So it was 3 back-to-back moments. And I realized, oh my gosh, the universe is trying to wake me up to something because this is a lot of moments. And I realized okay, I honestly didn't know if I was going to get my job back or not. It was kind of a gray situation. We may take you back in 3 months. We may not. So it's kind of a gray scenario, but I decided, you know what, I'm just going to wait and see what happens. And I decided, you know what, I have 3 months. I have essentially a 3-month vacation. I can either wallow and cry and eat and do all those things I want to do, or I could do something that I've always wanted to do during this time and make the most out of it. And for me, I've always wanted to start a podcast. I've been obsessed with Lewis Howes, Rachel Hollis. I've been listening to all of them for years. So many episodes are in my head. And I decided I know myself pretty well. So I knew if I didn't do it then, it probably would have never happened. Especially with having that much free time, especially with not having the job and everything that I was going to every day. And so I realized okay, this is the only time it's going to happen. let's do it. So I went and I booked people before I was ready. I went and like just put myself out there before I was ready. I just did everything. And yeah, now here we are.
Yes. And how many episodes have you recorded so far?
I think it's like 155.
Congratulations on, first of all, doing the thing you want to do, because a lot of us will have these dreams and we let them sit because of time and going through the motions and whatever else that comes up, and we don't go for these things. So first of all, but also, oh my gosh, like what the heck kind of stress you were under? What was your area that you were working in corporate?
Yeah. So I'm a loan officer. I'm still a loan officer. Okay. I still work with the company. But yeah, it was a lot because it was the struggle of getting the job at first with like, no experience, no real job history, nothing really to show for it. It was just like, give me a chance and let's see what happens. That's pretty much was it. So it was a lot of work to get the job. So that was like my main thing that came up during those 3 months is like, am I going to have to go through that whole thing again?
That's definitely can be a daunting process, especially when you're younger, first starting out, having a little maybe less experience than other folks applying for the jobs. Tell us how you're living your bigger, braver life now.
Yeah. Well, I feel like it's a journey. I feel like it's kind of the beginning of the bigger, braver life because I've been thinking about this in the last, I would say 6 months. I've been really kind of uncovering all these things, like in terms of like relationships, in terms of my job, all these underlying things that kind of are rooted in everything, like my need to perform, how I like to put like conditions around love and how I like to put all these things in like these boxes. And it's been kind of the last 6-7 months, it was kind of like realizing like how the first like 21 years of my life has led up to that. All of my behaviors have kind of been like that. And then the last 7 months, it's been kind of like unpacking. So it's been kind of a lot of clarity on like why, because I've been kind of wondering, it's like, why am I like this? And so it's kind of been unpacking that. What does a bigger, braver decision look like today? Because I don't know what's going to look like tomorrow. I feel like it's kind of big to think about like a bigger, braver life. At least when you first said that to me, I was like, oh, that's like a big thing, because you think about it and then you kind of get overwhelmed by it. By like, what's braver life. But I think for me, when I was listening to you, I was thinking about like, what's a like easier way for me to interpret it. And I was thinking like, okay, what would a bigger, braver decision for my life look like today versus like the whole grand scheme, just like thinking about it in terms of today.
I love that. Yes. Breaking that down into what makes sense for me. And it's the decisions that we make every single day. It's really true. And a lot of people that I've interviewed have been able to say, it is in the decisions that I make every day. It's in the work that I do. It's in the way I show up authentically and myself. So yeah, 100%. I think you nailed that perfectly. But I think for me, why I think of it in terms of this bigger, braver life, one of my strengths is being futuristic, future focused. Yeah. So I'm able to go, the full vision of all of that. And that's, I think, a strength I bring to my clients too, is being able to help go forward when it feels like it's hard to see that much and that far reaching. So yeah, but I love that. It's like, what braver decision can I make today? And that's probably a really great way to look at it as you're starting out too. And I love that. I want to go back to the identity that you were talking about, how you realized how much of your identity was wrapped up in the performance and the working hard and the paycheck and that. Can you talk to us a little bit more about that? Because I think a lot of the listeners, a lot of the high achievers, me included, in my past was very much, I've got to work hard and I'm a hard worker, I'm an achiever, I'm going to get this done. And it was just really focused and to a point where I burned myself out. So yeah, tell me more about, I'm glad that you're noticing that now, right? So tell me more about your unpacking of that.
Yeah. So it was funny because I actually didn't have to unpack it until it was tested, until I wasn't performing. So when I wasn't performing, and everything wasn't going my way, that's when it was really tested. Because prior to that, I was always performing and I never really had to have that piece of me tested. So I actually took a 7-month break from doing mortgages. I actually walked away from it. And the reason why I walked away from it from 7 months is I wanted to make sure it was something I really wanted and that I wasn't just doing it because I was good at it. So I wanted to make sure walking away that it was like really what I wanted. And another thing too is like, this is my first real job and the money came like that. And like, I couldn't appreciate it. I couldn't realize like the depths behind it. It was just kind of like, the money's falling. Like, this is great. Like, I didn't actually able to appreciate it until I walked away and went to a different sales job that was not the same way. And that tested all different parts of me to realize that I actually wanted to come back. So then I came back. And during that sales job, it was like, it's a high ticket closing position. So it's like you're selling a high ticket program. You're talking to someone, they can or cannot have money. You could talk to someone for 50 minutes and then figure out that they're not in a position to like invest anything at all. And that is hard. You invest, you're like talking to them for 50 minutes, you're pouring energy out into them. You're like doing all these things. You're coaching them. You're being like all these things. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, like they can't get the program.
Right.
So that was definitely hard because that was totally unlike anything I've ever done before. And it was very emotional because it was really into your emotions and emotional health and healing. So it's like, you have to be really aware of yourself going into those calls because it's like your stuff is getting triggered. Their stuff is getting triggered. Like it's a whole thing. So you have to be really aware of everything. I am actually really glad that I went to that job because it taught me a lot. It taught me a lot about like healing. It taught me a lot about like all these underlying things that were really like just running the show for me and have been running the show for me.
Right.
And when I went to that job, it was really interesting because like the first couple months I did, it was like the first couple months I did good. And then all of a sudden everything changed and I wasn't making as many sales. And all of a sudden my numbers were bad. And all of a sudden I wasn't performing. And then I realized I was like, why is this so hard for me? Like it felt like deeper than just what the numbers were showing. Like it felt like it was something deeper inside of me. And I realized that it was deeper inside of me. If I'm not able to perform, I'm not able to be loved. So that was the core of it, is it was attaching the love to the performance and thinking like I had to perform constantly. So that was like a really good experience in itself of learning like, oh, like this is the deep underlying thing that's keeping you, driving you to perform. But like, can we figure out how to take this from a place of constantly needing to perform to you are already loved. You're loved if you're not performing. You're loved even when you have zero sales. Can we take it to that place and see what happens there? Because we know this place gets you to burnout. So we know it doesn't work anyways. So that was kind of that whole journey of unpacking everything. And it was good because I never had all those buttons like pushed like that.
Yes. A lot of the things that you're saying, that when we tie our identity into performance, or we tie, the way that we give and receive love on some of these things, that's where it can really get confusing. And like you said, it's very emotionally involved and charged. And when you're doing something like sales, it's that transfer of energy, that transfer of trust and all of that when you're doing that. So, people are picking up on that, right? Especially if you're dealing with intuitive folks or, emotionally focused people. So yeah, what a great lesson. And, to be able to separate and clearly identify, right, the block here, and separate that from the work that you're doing. Because I think you're right, where we burn out and get in trouble is when we just keep working and working and working as a solution instead of truly take a step back, a pause, and say, okay, wait a second, why am I performing this way? Why is this, upsetting me so much? What is really going on? Layers underneath of just, like you said, what the surface reflected.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's hard to get to those layers because you don't want to.
It is. And that's, plug for, therapists and coaches, right? That's where, you can get support. And I'm curious, did you use, if you feel comfortable saying, did you use anyone else's support, or was that something self-led?
No, I used a lot of people's support. And it took a lot of people's support because that company I was actually working for about 5 months. At that company, one of the cool things is we had access to like all these coaches. So kind of whenever you wanted to be coached, you could be coached.
Nice.
And as much as you wanted to be coached, you could be coached. So I definitely took advantage of that. I was definitely constantly getting coached on all of this stuff.
Good. Yes. And that's where, bouncing it off of somebody who has the experience and the knowledge to help you navigate those deeper layers, that's what's going to get you the bigger results and the more long-reaching results because you're able to fully understand it in a holistic way. So I'm glad to hear that you had that support navigating that. And what an important lesson to learn now versus, many years down the road when it can be even more detrimental. We've worked ourselves into many layers of burnout. What got you into your line of work?
So the reason why I started doing it is actually my dad is actually in the mortgage industry, and he actually showed me one of his checks, and I was like, okay, that's interesting.
Yeah. Okay.
That's always the way it starts.
Right.
But it started there too. And it also started because I realized like all the things I wanted. And I was like, okay, it's going to take like a lot of money to fund all these trips that I want, to all these things I want. Like I have to figure out an avenue to figure out how I can actually get to these things. Yes. And what happened was he actually presented the same opportunity of getting my licenses. Like, he's like, I'll help you get your licenses. Like, it's not that hard. He presented it to me like 3 or 4 different times within the span of 6 months. But I didn't listen until like the 4th time. And the reason why I listened, and he said it in 3 to 4 different ways because he knows me too, right? You have to say it. What happened was the 4th time, I realized I was like, okay, like I barely have any money. Like I barely have anything that else I can do. It's now or never.
Right.
So that's why the 4th time I actually listened is because I was like in the scenario where I was like, it's worth a shot. Like the worst case scenario, I get work experience. I get to experience in different industry. I get to learn all these things. And it was actually funny. I like telling this story because I found it hilarious. So I applied to like Ross. I applied to smoothie bars. I applied to all these different places. Mm-hmm. Never got to any of them. But somehow I ended up getting this corporate job. Making a lot more money than I would have at this.
So funny. Yes. So, I heard a little bit. It sounds like you do have plans for a bigger, braver life. Tell me more about the things that you want to do with your money, the lifestyle that you want to live with this money.
Yeah. So later on, what I'm planning on doing is I want to run a bunch of Airbnbs. Nice. So I want to all across the US. That's something I really love to do. And then another thing I really love to do later on is I've loved to do like retreats, like with people who've already been on the podcast. Like I've loved to do retreats in like Bali or like Greece or like Thailand. Yeah, I love to do retreats.
Yeah.
Build my podcast audience more first. Yeah. I've loved to do more podcasts on. And I've loved to do like more trips. I don't travel too much, so I'm going to travel more. So
what drove you to start your podcast? I know there's a lot of folks in the community listening that would, love to share their message via a podcast or something similar.
Well, I like podcasting because you don't have to get ready for it. Like it's just, yeah. You don't really have to do anything. Yeah. Like it's more comfortable. I feel like it's more comfortable than me trying to do a YouTube video or something else. Like I'm fine with that, but I just find it to be more homey. Like it just feels more of a comfort to just speak into my phone and just see what happens. Mm-hmm. And I've just always loved podcasting. Like I've always loved the idea of just getting to talk to someone and kind of record it and just like it's also kind of permission too. It's permission to have conversations with people you probably wouldn't like just walk up to them and have a conversation with them. Right. It's kind of a permission slip to ask different people who you might not have access to otherwise to go on a podcast with you and to be able to ask them anything. So I wanted to have that. Another thing, I wanted something that was like funny, and I wanted something that like kind of sparked like a remembrance in you, like sparked a remembrance of your 20s, kind of sparked that kind of like laughter in you. Like it matches my humor. Like yes. I'm very sarcastic, so it really matches. So I wanted something like that. And yeah, I just really wanted to see like, I feel like too, I also wanted it because I'm more of an introvert. So I realized I needed something to work on that part of me to be able to be more talkative, to be able to like expand more. I realized there was going to have to be an avenue to force me to do that. And I knew a podcast would force me to do that too.
That's awesome. It sounds like it's really helping you to connect with others. Like you said, kind of maybe do some more brave actions by talking to people you normally wouldn't, or inviting them on and having them share their stories. But sounds like also with the benefit of, the community listening, being able to have some of that laughter, that joy, that nostalgia for their 20s, but also learning important lessons. Sounds like looking at your show and listening to some of the episodes, you had some really awesome, diverse speakers on so far.
Yeah. Yeah. I like to have a lot of it done with like different people because I don't know. I feel like it gets kind of boring if you go kind of for the same type of people. Okay. So I just kind of like to be able to like go to different people for different things. And like, I feel like there's a lot of stories. That's another part too, is I feel like there's a lot of stories that aren't being told. So that was another interest for me for the podcast. I felt like there was like more stories that could be told.
Yes, I love that. Giving the platform the opportunity for people to share those important nuggets and stories too. Yeah. And that was one of the reasons I started this show, was to kind of learn from community. That's something that I did growing up, was learning from other people's shit shows or other, right? And saying, oh, I'm not going to do that. Or, learning from my own and sharing those with other people. I think that's so important to have this opportunity to share. So tell me a little bit more about, after you've done some of this work, to kind of decouple yourself from this identity that, you have to perform in order to feel value and love and all of that. So once you've kind of done some of that work, how do you define success now?
I think I define success as peace. I feel like a peace and a calmness to it versus like a contentment to it. Like, I feel like there's like a peace, like something about it that's really like knowing that you're in the place that you're meant to be and you're doing what you're supposed to be doing. And I think in the past I've attached a number to it, but I think more now it's more like a piece about it.
Yeah, I love that. And one of the things I'm working with all my clients on is, how can we be in alignment, right? Alignment usually is the thing that is synonymous with peace. We are doing the things we want. We're showing up how we want. And, we're saying no to the things that don't fit that. So I love that. And for those who are listening to this and they want to start a podcast, but they're maybe a little nervous or have some blocks coming up, can you share some advice or some encouragement?
Well, I would do a couple things if there were blocks coming up. I would do a journaling of like what those blocks are. I would definitely write it down. And when you write it down, you look at it and you could kind of say like, really, like you could be able to like really see it.
Right.
Versus like when it gets stuck in our head, I feel like it just gets stuck in our head and it really doesn't move anywhere. Yep. So I feel like being able to see those would be like huge to be able to help. Another thing that helped me personally is I had to just do all the action and not think about it. So I just had to set everything up. So I had to do it. So I was accountable to the guest who was already showing up. And I had to set it up in that way so that I would show up. So if you're like me and you need someone to be accountable, I would just get a Calendly link and just get the link, send it out to people, make them book in your schedule. So that way you have to show up because it's no longer about you. It's about the guest who's expecting you to show up. Right. So that's the best way for me because I needed other people to hold me accountable. So that's what helped, just getting scheduled before I even knew what I was doing. I didn't know anything that I was doing at all.
Yeah, that's a really good point. It's, if you do have that goal and arguably whatever that is, right, it's being able to find a system to hold yourself accountable, whether that's a coach, whether that's having other people schedule and you have to show up, reminders, alarms, whatever that is for you, getting your system to hold yourself accountable. But also it's taking that brave action and not sitting in the fear and the, oh my gosh, how do I do this? I don't know. The unknown. We're nervous about the unknown. We're nervous about failing, all the different things that can come up. It's okay. What's my next brave step? So that's a wonderful piece of advice. I spoke with another woman who has a podcast, and she really encouraged me I was telling her about turning this into a podcast, and really encouraged me to not put it off, launching. I said, well, I'm kind of thinking about the date and I got to do all this and that. And she said, I'm going to challenge you to do it by the end of the month, because there's someone out there that needs to hear this, that's going to be supported by your message. And I'm like, oh, well, dang, now I can't put it off anymore. It's getting that why and that motivation to show up and be and do the things that we're called to do.
I couldn't put it off either, because I knew if I put it off, it wasn't going to happen.
Another layer of accountability, right? You start it and it's a thing. It's a living, breathing thing now. You got to go for it. How are you bringing balance and self-care into your life? How are you making that a priority?
So now I have a coach who I see every week.
Right.
That's something I definitely realized I needed, because going those long periods without having anyone, I realized I really need that. So I have a coach. And then another thing that I do is I have like the same routine every day. So I always work out. I always make time to listen to a YouTube video that inspires me. I make time to do all those things. And then I also realized when I need to just step away from things, like I realize in my mind now of like, okay, like let's put this away for now and let's come back to it later, like when you're not as burnt out, or like when you actually are able to come back to it. So I feel like I'm able to have more recognition now versus before. So yeah, I feel like just paying attention to even like the little signs. If there's something you like doing and you realize you're too burnt out to even do it, like you need to take a break. You need to take some time for yourself. Yeah.
It's that awareness piece, right? We got to have the awareness of what's going on and then take a step back and adjust and do what we need to do to support ourselves. What would you share about your experience, and what would you say to those folks who are kind of contemplating reaching out to a coach right now?
My reasoning about like why I didn't reach out to a coach sooner, it was mainly me thinking like, oh, like if I can't figure it out on my own, then that means it was something tied to not good enough or not smart enough. I realized like, okay, like this is tied to something. Like this isn't because of like any other factor, but it's tied to like, I need to be able to figure this out on my own. And then I realized I was like, okay, well, that got you exactly here. Like maybe we need someone else to help you figure out the next steps. Maybe someone else has to be with you to be able to figure out what's next for you. So I realized a lot of it was internal about not wanting to have a coach. I would look at, listening to different things from different coaches that you resonate with and kind of see which one resonates the most. If they have free calls, like go do free calls for all of them and see which one you felt the most connected to, because you want to be able to have the full experience. And if they're not a good fit, then you want to find someone else who's going to be a good fit for you. I heard this from a coach about paying attention to like what you're jealous of. Yeah. So if you're jealous of someone who's speaking, or if you're jealous of someone who has like a certain job, or if you're jealous of someone who's in like a romantic relationship because you're not in a relationship, like kind of paying attention to what those different things are. Mm-hmm. Another thing that I learned that I love is like learning how to reframe triggers, like reframing triggers as a gift of things to pay attention to versus like seeing them as like, oh, I have to deal with this trigger. Oh, this is coming up for me. Like kind of like reframing the way you look at it and being able to see it. So I'll share this. I got triggered a lot on Valentine's Day. And the reason why I got triggered a lot in Valentine's Day is because I am single. So it did trigger me a lot because I saw all these like photos of all these happy Instagram couples, and they had like the rings and, and the flowers and the chocolates and all these things. And I was like, why am I getting so triggered looking at all these photos? And so I was like, okay, there's something here. There's a reason why. And I realized I kept on digging into it and trying to get to the bottom of it. And I was like, oh, like the reason why I'm getting so triggered by these people is because I think that this is like only a certain amount of people can have this relationship. And I am viewing all these people having this relationship as that's something I can't have. So I had to go to that layer of it.
Yes, that's a good insight right there.
Yeah. And realize like, oh my gosh, instead of viewing this as like, oh, this is showing me that it's possible, I was going from the other lens of like, oh, this is showing me that this is a limited resource. Only some people can have it. All these people have it. So I'm just not going to have it.
So it sounds like you turned it around and was able to say, wait a second, that's an incorrect or an unhelpful belief that I have. And here's how I'm going to change this instead. Great example. Thanks for sharing that.
Because I feel like it's easy to get like annoyed with like,
Right.
oh, I haven't been that far because I keep on getting triggered by the same thing, or like, it's kind of easy to see it that way. But I feel like when you're able to see it in the way of like, oh, there's another layer to this that I'm not seeing. What's the other layer to this I'm not seeing that I get the opportunity to work on right now?
So good. You are using that, coach. Okay, nice. Thank you so much for everything that you've shared. How can folks reach you and listen in and tune into the Shit Show of My 20s?
Yeah. So my podcast is called The Shit Show of My 20s. I'm at The Shit Show of My 20s on Instagram. So my podcast is available everywhere. So you can search it or you can add me on Instagram.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here, Sophia. And for everyone listening, make sure to continue to follow this show, the Bigger Braver Life Show, and make sure to check out The Shit Show of My 20s. Sophia has a ton of amazing episodes there. And if this has inspired you to reach out to a coach, feel free to reach out to me and I can support you or point you in the right direction. And we will see you in the next episode.